We see your boy chick. He's coming to shul. It's great to see him and your family.
God. Yeah, I saw him a couple of times in like learning programs and with the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Got him involved in the board.
Yeah. Well,
it's gonna be a big macher one day.
I hope so. All right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy Hanukkah. So, Marty, did you have success? Good morning. Good morning. Okay, the gang's all here. So I wanted to follow up on a very disturbing commentary that we saw yesterday, that while it is prohibited to strike your fellow Jew, under certain limited circumstances, it is permitted to strike your wife. And I was very disturbed by it. And my disturbance was somewhat lifted when I did just a bit of cursory research. So I have it here on the screen on the Zoom, and I'm just not sure about how I can. We have to figure out. What I'll do is I'll send it on the WhatsApp as well. This document. It's a Word document, so that if anyone wants to be able to find it, you'll be able to find it as well on your WhatsApp. I didn't think of that. That's a good idea. Do that. Yeah. We can. There is. All I need is a cable, and it's a great idea, Joby. I should really do that in the future. All right. But what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to put it on the Choshen Mishpat Sheer WhatsApp. I got to add Marty to it. So let me just add Marty to that WhatsApp. Add participant. Okay. Okay, so Marty, I added you to our group, and now you'll get the document that I want to send out. So let me. Oh, okay. Good.
I like your question, Todd. I thought that was a great question regarding we don't learn from modern society. We learn on work from before. That was a great question.
Okay. So hold on a second. Trying to figure out how to do this. Oh, here we go. Okay. So what I've done now is I've sent the document on the WhatsApp. So if you're part of the WhatsApp group, you've received the document. I'm going to now share screen as well, once again, with us on the Zoom. So you can see it on the Zoom. And what I wanted to do is see the original halacha as it appears in Shulchan Aruch with Rav Moshe Isserles, okay? He's the one who brings up the issue. And he's writing this in the 16th century. And the truth is, Rav Stern, I feel, although he's an excellent author, I don't think he did a great job in presenting this halacha with the proper framing that I think it needed to be presented with over here. The original halacha appears as follows. It's in Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer, Hilchos Gittin Simin Kuf Nun Dalet. Isha makeh ishto. If a man strikes his wife, aveirahi biyado kemakeh chavero, he is committing a sin no different from striking any other human being, any other Jew. Be'im ragilhu bekach, and if he makes it a habit, if he's a regular abuser, yesh biyad based in liyasaro ulahacharimo ulahalkoso b'chol minei ridui ukefia. Then the Beis Din is vested with the authority to put him in cherem, to afflict him, to even give him lashes, in all different methods of coercing him to stop, and making him swear that he will not do it again. And if he doesn't listen to the instructions of the Beis Din, there are those who opine that we force him to divorce his wife. Provided that we give him due warning. In other words, you do it once, you do it twice, man, you do it three times, and you're out. Because it is not the way of Jewish men to strike their wives. And it is rather something that we would expect heathens to do. Jews never strike their wives. Okay, he's writing this in the 16th century in Krakow, Poland. Okay, so in other words, you're in the midst of medieval world, and women are second-class citizens and are treated like chattel in many social settings, but this is never the way of the Jewish husband. But that's provided that he initiates, and this is where Rav Stern came on to the quote, and that's why I think he didn't frame it correctly. So up until now, we've been talking about a man who initiates violence against his wife. But if she curses him for no reason, or she insults his mother or father, and he regularly verbally rebukes her and she refuses to listen, she's a real shrew, yesh omrim de mutar lahakota, then there is an opinion that says that you're allowed to coerce her to stop with physical force. Yesh omrim de afilu isha ra'a asur lahakota, and others opine that even a bad wife you're not allowed to strike. And then this is based on two opinions in the Rishonim in earlier commentaries, whether it's ever permitted to strike a wife. And surprisingly, the Ramah sides with the first opinion. Bahasvara Rishona hi ikar. But the first opinion is what I side with, that it is permitted if your wife is a shrew and she refuses to listen to your constant admonishment. V'im eno yodua miha goreim. Now, let's say a woman comes forward to the community and says, my husband is abusing me. And he claims it's because she's a shrew and she constantly insults me and insults my family. Ein habal neman lomar shehi hamatchelet. The husband does not have automatic believability if he says she started it. Shekol hanashim bechezkas kashrus, because all women are assumed to be kosher. In other words, we immediately side with the wife with an absence of knowledge. We always side with the wife first in halacha in the absence of knowledge in cases of abuse. And the Beis Din is further vested with the authority, which is shocking. They can actually set up someone, okay, we're going to send someone over to live in your house for a couple of weeks to supervise who's telling the truth. And then in that situation, if she is witnessed to be cursing him regularly without any reason whatsoever, then he must divorce her and she forfeits her ksuba. She forfeits the amount of money that's written in the ksuba because she's a wayward woman. Venerally dafka biragila bekach ve'achar hahasra'a uchashmoni. But that's only if it's habitual, and it's only if we've regularly warned her that we say to the husband, divorce her, and she forfeits her ksuba. The imholcha mi beiso v'lavsa v'achla im yatzasa mikach shehikosa tamid chayiv l'shalem. Furthermore, if a woman goes and borrows money because she needs to go live in another place, she needs to go live in a shelter, what we would say in modern terms. and she claims it's because her husband is regularly abusing her, we believe her, and we obligate the husband to pay for the cost of her living expenses, as we've explained before. Now, framed in this way, that's the end of the halacha. Framed in this way, you get a slightly different nuance now, don't you, as far as what's going on over here, okay? But I'm going to take it one step further. We're now going to see the Aruch HaShulchan, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, who brings a compendium of these halachos, and he says as follows: "V'haklal b'dvarim eila gam bizmanenu." He says the general rule in our time, which is the beginning of modern man living, she'ein b'kochenu lahamid mishpatei hadat al tila. He says there's really no way for us to enforce a lot of these halachos that are advocated by the Ramah. We simply don't have the same kind of jurisdiction that Jewish communal infrastructures had in the medieval times. Like what? A woman's going to go to Beis Din, and then we're going to coerce the husband to do this, or to have someone, a ward of the Beis Din, move in with them. I mean, these things are just not practical in modern times. Mikol makom me'ayinimu mishtadlim la'asot shalom ben ish li'ishto. But we just try our best to create matrimonial harmony. The imroim, shalom bayis. The imroim she'ein biyacholes laso shalom beinehem. And if we realize that it's not working, that there's just, no matter how hard, the efforts of the Rabbanim and the friends and the Rebbitzins and everyone tries, and it's just not working. So then mishtadlam begeitshi garshu zeh zemiratzanam hatov. Then we do our best to influence them to go ahead with a get, go ahead with a divorce, because things just simply aren't working. Okay. And then he writes in the very next seif, he says, Ish ve'ishto shemitkota timu mivinim shahasiba bazeh ish o isha shebeveisam o bishchunasam. He says, if a man and a woman are constantly fighting, and the community members or the leaders, or he doesn't say who it is, but somebody figures out, maybe it's the rabbi, maybe it's the Rebbitzin, maybe it's a good friend, somebody looks at the situation, and we come to the conclusion, why they're fighting all the time is because they have someone living with them in their house who's constantly inserting marital discord and really putting a wedge between the two of them. O bishchunatam, or someone maybe not living with them, but let's say a neighbor. It could be kechamota v'gisata. It could be a mother-in-law. It could be, he says that, it could be a mother-in-law. It could be a sister-in-law. Okay. O sone shela, or another a person that she doesn't, that's an enemy of hers. V'chayotze bahen, or any kind of situation where we detect that there is someone who was trying to sabotage this marriage. So what are we supposed to do? What action is the community supposed to take in that situation? So hachiv mutal al habeis din lahotzian mi beisam ushchunasam. The Beis Din has to do whatever they can to extricate that person who's the saboteur out of their house or out of their neighborhood. Be'ein haba'al yacholomar, the husband doesn't have a right to say, Lo otzi esen biglal ishti. I'm not going to kick my mother out of the house because of my wife. What if he says, no, I'm not going to kick my mother out of the house? And it's destroying the marriage. And the Aruch HaShulchan, to his credit, Rav Epstein, who's writing this, recognizes that all it takes is one person to destroy a marriage. Okay? He says, Ve'ein shomin lo. We don't listen to the husband if he says, no, I'm choosing my mother over my wife. Beis Din tells him, you don't have a right to choose your mother over your wife. You're married to this woman. And if your mother is destroying the marriage, then let's find a nice home to put your mother in. We'll set her up, we'll get her a place to live on her own. We'll get her a helper if she needs a helper, but you can't destroy your marriage because of your mother or your sister-in-law or whatever it is. Ki ein lecha chiyav yoter me'asher mechuyav habal lechabed ulechavev et ishto. Because there is no greater obligation than a man has to any other human being that is higher than honoring and showing affection towards his wife, which is an incredible statement. V'lo litzara, and he is obligated to not cause her pain. V'kach pasku hakadmonim, and this is based on earlier great sages. Okay, have we framed it a little bit better now? Okay, it gets better. Now I have a sefer called the Kaf HaChaim. Now there's two sefers called Kaf HaChaim. One is from Harab Sofer, who was a Sephardi posek of the 19th century, and the other one was a Rav Palaji, who was in the 18th century. This is and it's lesser, it's not as popular as the first one that I mentioned, because the Kaf HaChaim is like a Mishnah Brura for Sephardim. And he has amazing stuff, this Rav Sofer. But this is a different Kaf HaChaim. It's more of an ethical treatise. And it's by Rav Palaji, who was a Turkish rabbi. And he writes in the first chapter of his Sefer, he talks about ethical advice, okay? And he writes as follows in the Sif Yud Aleph in that Sefer. Okay, everyone see where I'm pointing to? He says, V'yoser mehema bini, ki zahir im chaberatcha ve'eshet britecha. He says, the more important than anything I've mentioned before, my son, be very careful with your best friend and the wife of your covenant. That's what he calls your wife. Shelo lisno ota mikol shekain shelo lakalala. You should never hate her. You should never curse her. Uchemoshe kosav b'sefer hanechmat sefer habris chelek beis maimer yud gimel perik tesvav v'zeh yichtov yado. And I'm quoting now, he says, for you from a beautiful sefer called Sefer Habris, which I'm not familiar with. And he writes as follows: Sheyesh anashim asher yishmeru et atzman me'asot ra l'chol adam, aval yisneu et neshotehem. He says there are certain people who are very careful to be genteel and kind and sensitive to all people in the world, except for their own wife. Their wife they treat with absolute disregard. Va'omrim ein bazeh avon, ki ani baal ha'isha, v'ishta kegufi. And these men think to themselves, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm her husband, and I'm her master. And we know that ishto kegufo, that my wife is like my own body. So if I want to flagellate myself or afflict myself, it's like I can do that to my wife as well. You know, people who have a sense of self-loathing will do that sometimes. If I loathe myself, I'll take it out on my wife also. You know, ve'ein bahem tevuna ki gadol avona minaso yoter me'im asu kein la'adam acher. But what they don't realize is that it is a greater sin to mistreat your wife than it is to mistreat any other human being. Ki lama yigru'u hanashim lihiyot bichlal ve'ahavta l'reyacha kamocha. Why should your wife be any less included in the commandment of the Torah, ve'ahavta l'reyacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, u'vichlal lo tisnat achicha bilvavecha, or included in the Torah prohibition, you may not hate your fellow in your heart. V'chigavra boi chaye nashi lo boi chaye. He says, is it only men that you are obligated to sustain, and you're not obligated to sustain a woman? In balei and ba'ava va'achva, to be with her husband with love and with brotherhood. Ach anasham yoter chamor al ki hi etzem me'atzmo uvasar mibisaro va'ocher she'ero achzari. And the reason why it's worse to mistreat your wife is because she's a part of you, and you are taking it out on someone who is the closest human being to yourself. Ve'asur litza'er et ishto bidvarim umikol shekain she'asur laharim yad aleha. and it is therefore forbidden to verbally abuse your wife, and it is certainly forbidden to ever raise a hand against her. The Ha'arizal Katav, the Ari, the famous Rabbi Luria, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great Kabbalist, writes, Shemi shemerim yad al ishto, that whoever raises his hand against his wife, afilu hu ra'ui shetashre alav ruach hakodesh, eno shore alav ad shi'aset tshuva. Doesn't matter how holy you may be. Doesn't matter, you may be worthy of having divine inspiration rest upon you, but this will not happen until you do tshuva for having raised your hand against your wife. V'yachavein kavana yidua asher katav b'kitvei hakodesh shelo, and a person should be very discerning in everything that the Ari writes. V'adarabba ha'ish hayareyat Hashem yikshor nafsho b'nafsha im avotot ha'ahava. And he writes in a very flowery language. He says, a true God-fearing man should always bind his soul to the soul of his wife with the bonds of love. And recognize with great gratitude what your wife does for you. All of our wives save us from sin. What does he mean by that? That our wives save us from sin. Because man is a sexual beast. And if you have a wife, she basically gives you an outlet for doing all different kinds of things. And that's enough of a reason to show her affection. Uvizohar HaKadosh Amru, and the Zohar says, Ein hashchina shore ela b'dachar v'nukva, that the Shechina will only rest on the united man and woman. Shechina doesn't rest on a man alone, it rests on a man and a woman when they are united together. Ve'ata achi v'rosh sim panecha ledavar hazeh. He says, now my brother, my dear and exalted brother, pay attention to what I'm telling you. Hateoznecha ushma ledivrei chachamim shamru beperek bav Yevamos. He says, listen to what our sages tell us in the 6th chapter of Tractate Yevamot. It says, Ha'ohev et ishko kigufo, v'hamechabeda yoter megufo. He says, if a person loves his wife as much as he loves himself, and he honors her more than he honors himself, Akatuv omer v'yadata ki shalom ohalecha, ufkudat navech v'lo techta, v'yadata ki rov zarecha. He says, it quotes a pasuk that says, you will know peace in your tent, and there will be the visitation of God upon your dwelling place. You will not sin, and you will know the abundance of your seed. In other words, you'll be blessed in all respects. Ad kan Lashono b'kitzur. This is the gist of what the Arizal writes. Yu'uyin sham ba'orach lashon hazahav v'haderet upuk chazi mashakatav b'shuvat maharam ha'aruchot siman pei aleph. And then he quotes from the Sefer Maharam, who writes at length, Dahamake et ishto yesh lahachmir alav yoter mehamake et chavero. That one who strikes his wife, the Beis Din should be should come down harder on him more than they come down on a person who strikes another Jew. Shelachavero ein chayav bichvodo uli ishto chayav bichvoda. Because a stranger, I have no particular obligation to honor, but I have a very specific obligation to honor my wife. And so if I strike the person whom I have an obligation to honor, my crime is even greater. And anyone who does so should be placed in cherem, should be put under a ban, should be lashed publicly, and should be punished harshly. Now, what are we going to do with the Ramah, with Rav Moshe Isserlis, who says that there are two opinions in the Rishonim as to whether you're allowed to strike your wife when she curses you and insults your parents? And he says, I side with the first opinion that says it's permitted if she behaves in this way. So what am I going to do with that statement? This is what Rav Palaji asks. He says, the hamake et ishto b'kemake et chavero, kvar hevi sham b've'er hagola. He says that striking your wife is the same thing as striking your friend. He says, kvar hevi sham b've'er hagola tshuvat mohariv dahavi yoter chamor. He says, first of all, the Ramah is one opinion, but the Be'er Hagola says that if you strike your wife, it's worse than striking your fellow Jew. Uchenira shehi tshuvat maharam bav halazu v'gam rabbeinu b'chaya b'seder teitze kasav the chavero uli ishto over bishnei lavin yu'uyan sham. And Rabbeinu B'chaya in Parshat Kitetze writes that if you strike your wife, you are violating two violations, and I refer you to his commentary there. והגם שכתוב בספר ירים סימן ר' מ' ו' דמתכוון לייסר את אשתו ולהדריכה בדרך ישרה, או לייסר את חברו להדריכו בדרך ישרה מותר יעוין שם. He says, and that's true. There's a sefer called Sefer Yereim, a very highly respected sefer, that says that if your intent in striking your fellow Jew or your wife is to rehabilitate them and to get them back on the right track, then under certain circumstances it's permitted. V'chein katav haradvaz b'tshuvot hachadashot chelek bet siman taf mem zayin. De'im medaber et dvarim bilti hagunim lefi toratenu hakidosha yesh lo reshut liyasro lahakota ulahachazira lemutav kevin shehi birshuto. He writes very similarly to the Ramah that if your wife starts speaking in a very inappropriate way, she uses words that are inappropriate, she insults your loved ones and so forth, then the Radvaz also grants permission under those limited circumstances to strike your wife. He says, so Rav Palaji says, I happen to agree that if it's a friend of yours and he's speaking inappropriately or he's doing things that are inappropriate, there are, under limited circumstances, times when you can give him a zetz and say, what the heck are you doing? So give him a slap, right? He says, that's okay for someone other than your wife. Aval bi'ishti nir eli shelo hutar bizman hazeh lahakot et ishto. But when it comes to your wife, it would seem to me that nowadays, and this is the 18th century, nowadays there is never license granted to strike your wife, afilu keshehi eina holechet b'derech yishra, even when she's misbehaving, even when she's saying and doing things that are not appropriate. Imlo al yedei hatrad beitin o shchenim me'anashim ksherim va'anshe yosher, unless there has been the sanction of the Beis Din and other people who are constantly admonishing her. And listen to what he says. He says the reason why license is never granted to strike your wife is because any man can say that. You know, you live with someone 24/7. It's very easy to rationalize how you can be abusive to that person if they get on your nerves. So every man is going to say, my wife was doing this, my wife was doing that. And like the Ramah had said, a man does not have ne'emanus, he does not have believability just because he makes a claim of what his wife was doing. V'lav kol kimine lahaminu al pi diburo. V'hagam shemoram sham b'haga katav shtei svarot. And even though the Ramah said that there are two opinions. Rishona di mikalelato bechinam o mikalelat aviv imo v'hoticha midvarim ve'ena mashkechat alav. He says that if your wife constantly insults you and insults your parents and she doesn't listen to your rebuke, yesh omrim demuter lahakota v'yesh omrim dafilu ishara asur lahakota. Some say you are allowed to strike her, and some say that even a bad woman you're not allowed to strike. V'siyem v'katav hasvar rishona hi ikar yuyon sham, and the Ramah ends up siding with the first opinion. It seems to me that the Ramah was only addressing his time and his place in Krakow in the 1500s. He says, because aval bizmanenu da achasor dari. He says, but in our generation, where we have gone down in our prestige and in our integrity as a community, and men do not behave with the same nobility as they did perhaps a couple of centuries ago, If we grant license to a husband to strike his wife when she's misbehaving or when she's insulting, kol echad ve'echad yomar ki kedinhu makeh ota. This will grant justification to any man who wants an excuse to be abusive to his wife to go ahead and do it. And therefore, Lachein nirali shelo lahakota ad asher yivarer beveitin uvishchenim be'edim ksherim shamet ito bevirur gamur. And therefore, he says, it is never permitted to strike one's wife, and the only time that there would ever be a justification is when the Beis Din has been able to verify the matter, the neighbors are testifying all against her, etc., etc., etc. But of course, in that situation, what did the Aruch HaShulchan write? In a situation where there's witnesses to her horrible behavior, then we just tell the couple to get divorced, and then we move forward. We don't. But again, we're not granting license to ever strike. So Rav Palagi's words are very, very strong against this idea. And so my heart feels a little better now. That's all. So you helped me today, Chevra, because sometimes we do have to add a little bit of extra commentary to the sometimes the Imrei Yaakov is very terse. He doesn't give us the whole picture, and we have to research it a little bit more. So yes. And by the way, we didn't address your question yesterday. We still have to get back to it, Ron.
Last century, there's been a lot of secular laws that have come out to protect women. So in these times, before the 19th century, women really depended on men for their sustenance. So it's fine that you want to, that we are able to divorce the woman, but the woman's going to be left in a really vulnerable situation because who's going to take care of them? No
Exactly. And that's why we have to try and salvage the marriage whenever we can, right? And that, by the way, it's true in the 21st century too, in many, many situations. I don't know if it's most, but perhaps I'm tempted to say most situations. When a wife is really at her wit's end with her husband, what I have tried in the past is to investigate what her financial status is. Because when a woman is at her wit's end with her husband and he's just a total jerk, we also have to look at the fact that if I or anyone else that I know encourages her to get divorced, if we haven't created a financial plan for her, we may be doing a terrible thing. We may be very, very derelict in our responsibility to this woman. It may be worth it for her to go back to a jerk of a husband and still be well provided for than to encourage her to get divorced and put her in financial dire straits because we just want to stick it to this guy who's a total jerk. And it's not simple. Okay.